Hey there, my name's Mark McCartney and welcome to the What is a Good Life podcast. Over the last 2 years, I've interviewed nearly 200 people around this question. It's not to provide universal answers or universal truths or prescribe a way of living for yourself. It's more that you listen to the guests' inquiries, their curiosities, and their approaches to life to perhaps to evoke your own self-inquiries that lead you to finding your own answer to this question. Also, a big part of what I'm trying to share is just the sharing of meaningful conversations amongst potential strangers, and also the capacity maybe for us to share intimacy, curiosity, and exploration together. So this week, we're up to the 54th episode of the What is a Good Life podcast, and I'm delighted to be joined by our guest, Gab Ciminelli. Gab is the founder of the Silent Leadership Institute in Japan, author of Nothing Changes the World, Excerpts and Insights on the Art of Nothing, and speaker on the Art of Nothing. In this illuminating conversation, we explore our capacity not to learn from our mistakes and how we get swept away by our conditioning, be it our upbringing, education, or culture. We share our experiences of re-sensitising ourselves to the human beings we naturally are through silence, space, reflection, and nature, and the experiences of suffering that prompted a departure from the status quo. We delve into navigating our wider sense of separation and disconnection, transcending our ideas of identity and our fixation on measurement and labels, to an awareness of what is and how we could step into the unknown. Look, this whole conversation with Gab is a breath of fresh air. His open-heartedness and willingness to explore embodies much of what he is pointing to in this conversation. If you are in need of looking at your life or the world with fresh eyes, which given the way many of our lives are going and indeed the way the world is going may be very necessary, this conversation will give you multiple pointers as to where you can start. I know I, for one, when listening back to this episode while editing it, I took a lot from this conversation and learned a lot from it. I think Gab is sometimes subtly pointing to some really beautiful concepts or ways of being or ways of interpreting the world. So if you enjoy this conversation or indeed this episode, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you're on the podcasting platforms, please continue to leave your lovely reviews, as I greatly appreciate your support at this stage of my podcasting journey. So without further ado, the 54th episode of the What is a Good Life podcast. Gab, thank you very much for joining us today on the What is a Good Life podcast. As I mentioned to you in our little pre-chat there, I've enjoyed following your work for a while. I really enjoyed the essence of what you capture, I think, so wonderfully as well. So thank you very much for joining us today.
Mark, thank you. It's my pleasure to be here. As I mentioned, it's looking forward to this for quite some time, and it's nice to meet you live and being recorded too, which is great. Right? Let's see what comes out of this.
So as I kick these off, Gab, it is with the question of: is there a question you're trying to answer as you move through life?
That's a big question, isn't it? I mean, it asks me, and then just to let you know, I mean, there's no way you can prepare for a question like this, and it's like, what is life? First of all, is another big question we might address during this conversation. But I guess the thing that really, if I can put it this way, keeps me awake the most is what's so difficult about humanity that we don't change as a humanity. I mean, if you consider the whole background of our history, we tend to put it into one lifetime, which is our personal lifetime, right? However many years you've been on this earth so far. But accompanying those years, along the way, you've got an education from somewhere. You've gotten rituals and routines that have fallen into your state of being, and those are actually really old. Right? There are some things that go back thousands of years that we're still practicing today. So it's not just your own lifetime that you're a product of. It's the whole history that you've been downloading into your mind. And along with that is the fact that we've had, so many wars. I mean, there was some statistic that we've had a war for, like, I don't know, the last 5,000 years. We continue to have wars almost every year. And I think it's time to ask the question, why haven't we learned from this? What's preventing us from living together on this planet as one people, as a one humanity? Because right now we seem to be still continually divided, right? I'm not sure how you feel about that. I know it's a kind of a deep topic, but it's the topic that
it's a question I ask a lot myself. There was a story in the newspaper a few years ago where, and it wasn't a big news topic for very long, but essentially I think the Australian government were supposed to buy submarines, nuclear submarines, I think from France. And then they reneged on the deal or something to this effect. And then they bought them from the US or the British. And I thought how curious it was that the story was that it was a diplomatic problem rather than, Jesus, we're still playing chess with like atomic or nuclear submarines between China and Australia in the ocean. Like,
Yeah.
do you know what I mean? Like it's so ingrained in us at this point that the absurdity of even just the preparation for it or the mitigation for it not to happen is just bonkers to me. Or even if I see like a YouTube ad pop up and it's a shoot 'em up game, like, or a war game, I'm just like, this
Mm.
is so weird that like in this video clip I'm watching, I'm seeing a crosshair focus in on a human, and or
Mm.
in a video thing and just seeing them blasted. So yeah, there's something that I find really, and look, that's not even going into, whether we talk about the Middle East, whether we talk about Sudan, whether we talk about Yemen, like whether we talk about battles between drug cartels in Mexico and the army. Like
Mm.
it's baffling to me when I don't even know of half the armed conflicts that are happening in the world right now. I
Right.
find that just staggering. Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And you brought something up in there that triggered my own memories. Like, what were a lot of kids doing in the bath when they were little kids? They had these little submarines, and then these little soldiers everywhere. I remember these little plastic soldiers you could buy from the shelf. I just wondered, that could be a nice little entry point. I mean, the fact that we don't change this has probably something to do with our upbringing, our history, our past, and how deeply ingrained it is within us. So, is the question about education? I mean, is that where the problem could be? Is it just the fact that we're born into a system of some kind where our own parents are not even aware of the behaviors that they present to us, and they've carried on traditions? Being Italian myself, I've had many traditions, as you can imagine, being Italian, that we used to follow, and we never used to question. Right? It was just part of sponging it all in. Going to school, we adapt a system, and I don't see anything in the system that teaches kids how to question things openly. It's more about the math, the languages, which are important subjects, but there's not enough time spent on inquiring. How does the mind work? What is the brain capable of doing, even at a young age? What are some of the things that you're experiencing on a day-to-day basis? I don't see much or many teachers just spend 10 minutes of a day in a classroom and just ask questions to the kids and say, well, what happened yesterday? Did you have any issues? Were there any arguments? Is there anything you want to talk about? And then going through the process of how the mind creates some of these conflicts. I think that's missing. We don't spend enough time, or we don't have enough space maybe in our minds to question. It's always download, download, download. And here in Japan, if you've got spare time after school, a lot of the times kids will go to what we call juku, which is after school class, which is study, improve
Right.
subjects, be more, get better grades, and eventually, you go to a good college and so forth. And that's, especially in Asia, is quite a high value. So could it be that? I wonder if it's education. Is it the political system? Is it, like you said, I've been totally turned off. I don't want to mention any platforms, but those ads that come up in the middle of watching a video where you see
Yeah.
that crosshair, like you mentioned, I just quickly shut down the whole browser when those things come up, because I'm just too sensitive to see those kind of things. I don't understand how people can watch it. It's that level of, where is and maybe this is it. Have we been desensitized to life, to nature,
Yeah.
to the basic, simple things that we used to have, that we still do, but we don't notice them anymore? Is it that desensitization through maybe, books? It could be playing games. It could have been movies. It could be anything. Right? So there's that always playing on my mind.
What's interesting though is like even if we reflect back on times pre this current educational system or pre technology, The wars were still going on, right? You mentioned over 5,000 years, wars have been going on almost
Yes.
every year. It's what I do think is really fascinating is in terms of just the space to question things. Because I
Mm.
think when we're in a crowd and we don't have that space to just explore, I think where I found more of my own, not even morality, but let's say just a value system. And I don't mean this in some virtuous sense, but just observing how I react when I do certain things.
Mm.
And if it makes me feel good, if it makes me feel like my heart is closed or my heart is open, shall we say.
Mm.
And I don't know. I think that's found in the individual spending time either in quietness, stillness, observing their own thoughts,
Mm.
observing their own reactions to these thoughts. Because I think in the headiness of a crowd, oftentimes we do, I don't know, get swept away in almost our base animalistic
Mm.
behavior.
Right.
And we end up then just adopting rituals or values or ideologies that I think that's why so many people suffer as well, because they're swept along with these ideologies that you say are so ingrained through education and everything else that you don't even get it becomes so ubiquitous that you can't even question
Yeah.
that because you don't even see it anymore.
Exactly. Exactly. I think that's the key. Because what I've definitely asked people, and I'll ask you as well, if you've ever taken a vacation, you've had a very long year of working hard. Everybody knows what this feels like. But you go on a vacation. Has there been any place where you've always felt like, I wish I could stay here longer, or I wish I could live here? Right. And if you look at people when they go to vacations, where do they usually go? I'm generalizing a little bit here, but where do they usually go? They go to the mountains, or
Ex-
they go to the beach,
yeah.
or some exotic island, or somewhere where they can just, take a break. And that asks a lot of questions. It just makes me wonder why people go back to their previous life and then go through another year of this stress and tension and what we think is life, and then go back again. And it's like it's the opposite, isn't it? The ratio should be the other way around. It's kind of weird, but it makes you ask questions. Of that. Definitely there is. If there's room, if you have space to just chill out a little bit, and I think nature can come in naturally very handy, which is why it's called nature. But one of the things I've definitely done since the pandemic is just gone for walks.
Mm.
Daily, get sunshine. First thing in the morning, just go out there and put your hands up in the sky, feel the sunshine, especially in the middle of winter. That makes a big difference. But, those little things that we think don't work or may just be like, whatever, those little tips actually make a big difference because slowly, nature just sits with you. The more you walk on there, you don't have to have any headphones on, any music, nothing, just sit in there. The more you start appreciating it. And then you start feeling a connectedness with the earth again. And from that, you start resensitizing yourself to the human being that you naturally are. I think that's definitely been a big difference in my own life. But you got to make that space. And that's the key.
Yeah, and you know what and maybe it's my own ignorance to a lifestyle that I haven't fully fallen in with, but prior to maybe the last few years where I joined LinkedIn, I didn't have any Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or anything like this, and I'd never actually posted anything until LinkedIn in my mid 30s.
Hmm.
And what I what I find strange sometimes is the busyness of modern life.
Hmm.
And when I say that, I mean, typically we still get up. Maybe if you have children, you tend to your children, you have breakfast, you go to work. And then afterwards, maybe you do something social, maybe you look after your children, maybe you eat, and maybe you go to bed.
Hmm.
Like this, I think this kind of, and people tell me they have no time. And then I say, how many hours, what's your screen time on your phone? And that could be a number of hours. And there's something about this, there's something really synthetic, a really synthetic kind of feel to the busyness that we seem to have
Hmm.
created without GDP going. And I'm not saying I believe in economic metrics, but if we're playing that game
Hmm.
without GDP or productivity going through the roof, there's this intense busyness, or there's this always switched on, or always like switched on in the most unproductive ways. Like there might be a chance I'm going to get this email, so I'm going to live in high anxiety all through the evening, checking my emails until it
Mm,
does or doesn't arrive.
right.
And I don't know. I think we've what I think is really interesting about what you said about nature is it takes away that synthetic feel. It takes
Hmm.
away that like space between you and almost your just your feeling of life. And there's something, and a number of guests have said this too, like there's something about just sitting in nature, you realize you're part of it again. Like I
Yeah.
think we've forgotten that. And it's not that it's really hard to assimilate that again because it's so deeply we are it.
That's it.
So you can't ignore it once you're there. You don't have to go through, well, rituals can be nice and they can be helpful, but once you're there, there's a part of you that just realizes this.
Yes. Yes, definitely. So that's the kind of innate value. If we're aware of this, not to make a routine out of it, but just to be there because you need some space. It just naturally, like you said, naturally kind of attaches to yourself because that's really what we are. And in all of that busyness, I think there's what you said also becomes important because you've got people. What are we all trying to do? And I say we as a humankind. I don't mean specific people, but as humankind, most of us are chasing our dreams, which could include being competitive, right? Trying to make a name for ourselves, trying to do YouTube, get some fame, popularity, maybe monetize through there. There's a drive behind some of that people want to get away from the regular work routines by making side income, for example. I'm not saying there's anything good or bad about this, by the way. If we go into good or bad, we'll be here forever. But we're never going to find this root cause of everything. But I think the way the world has been set up is something we need to question. And the fact that we are all divided into countries, states. Within states, we have counties and communities and cities, and you know, endless number of. If you would count all the communities in the world, I actually wonder if there's more than 8 billion of them. There's just so many of them. we, we've just divided us up, and again, it's not a negative or positive thing. If you look at just factual information that's going out there in your own consciousness, you'll see this that we are all just slowly dividing ourselves more and more and more. There's more labels describing us these days. Right? I still think there's not going to be enough letters to get to 8 billion people, but there's no mathematical sense in that. But it may have to come to all of that before we realize, what are we doing here? What is life all about? What is going on in this world that we have to be always managing life, managing stress, managing tasks, you know, um, forcing our way through life in such a way that we're basically draining our own brain, our own energy to be healthy, fit, and sensitive. There's a lot of that happening.
There's something gorgeous about the idea, though. If we were to put an optimistic spin on this level of division, it's almost like this idea that we grind ourselves down to the smallest point of separation, to the
Mm.
point that there is no separation left.
That's what I'm thinking. That's what I'm thinking. So, but if you draw the math curve, where you've got the x and y axis, and you kind of never get to zero, you never get to infinity, right? So there's a
Yeah.
danger of the world kind of collapsing on us before we get that far, and that's why I keep asking this question: why don't we see the in a way emergency that we need to really change as a humanity? That's the key element.
But I think the division of ourselves even by country is such a fascinating one because as an Irish kid growing up, and when we read about history and our defiance with the British and these kind of things, like I'm so emotionally invested in that, at the time. And
Mm.
but the moment, like Ireland has a population of 4.5 million, so the moment I draw a line around Ireland, that's like over 8 billion are excluded from that club as such.
Yes.
And then also I was thinking about this before, because I haven't lived in Ireland for 13 years, the kind of fickle nature of patriotism anyway. Because
Mm.
if we think that the first settlers came to Ireland 12,000 years ago, if we think that the planet's been around for 4.7 billion years, if we think, I don't know, however long anyone wants to say Homo sapien or our Neanderthal cousins have been around, 12,000 years, even if your lineage goes back to the very first settlers in Ireland, is a blink of an eye in comparison to existence or eternity, obviously.
Yes.
So there's some, and I think there's something about this, about us, maybe it's even some of the other things we're talking about, it's building kind of constructs, like mental constructs, that we make real by all believing or holding, and to the point that where they become very damaging is that we forget the fact that this is just a mental construct that we've put on this piece of land.
Exactly. And I think, you might have hit something there. Maybe I've kind of discovered this in my own mind, but if you go back in time, I don't think we as a human race ever designed psychology to work this way. I mean, if you think about maybe the ancient Greeks, I think they might have introduced the measurement, the unit of measurement. Everything was measurement for them. So what they introduced, I mean, measurement is important. We have to have an understanding of how fast something is, or how big something is, and so forth. And in terms of time, chronological time, we also have to be able to plan meetings, how long it takes to get to some place, catching a train, all that kind of stuff. But I don't believe that initially we planned to have it, how can I say, skew over into the psychological sense of relationships, right? Taking action to do things. And what I mean by that is, every time, and maybe there is a way, and I personally think that absolutely there is a way to, if I can use the expression, put the past behind us and just start a complete fresh plate of no history in a way. If we can let go of all of that, we would actually change the world very, very quickly. But it's so complicated and so deep, because if you look at what history is, it's all about measurement. Right? The fact that we take action every day is because right now in this moment, I'm not enough, or I don't have enough, or there's something else I have to do. And it's all going down to our conditioning. We've been taught this way. Again, going back to schools, we are taught to be, we're always compared. There was a story I heard. I have a friend from Taiwan, and then she remembered when she was a little child, she used to get lined up in front of the class with her test results from the highest to the lowest. And their test results were written on their forehead, right? So you'd see this score high to low. And that was like, the psychological impact of that is extraordinary. They may not think anything different of it, but for people who perhaps understand how it works, and this can be quite detrimental to kids. I honestly think kids' childhood is taken away from them far too early. But what I mean, if I can go back a little bit, otherwise we'll get a bit off track. But in terms of measurement, I think it plays on our mind all the time. We are always projecting in time. And I don't believe for a minute that we were designed to be this way. There is a place for measurement, but there's a place that it does not belong. It's just, and the place where it doesn't belong is the fact that in our own mind, we create constructs of people all the time, and we create a picture of them in our mind. Like, I have to watch out for the danger of people, or even yourself, looking at me and creating a picture of Gab in your own mind, thinking that he's like this, because that's still in your own head. And I have to watch out I don't do the same about you. If I create a picture about who you are, then the beauty of our initial meeting, our first time, is gone, because I start to build a database about you. Right, you're from Ireland and all that. I got to take all that out and say, hey, that's not important right now. We have to communicate as human to human, which is a wonderful process.
I think, and I don't know, even just to share something from when we chatted at the start, it was funny. I said my daughter is 4 months old, so that's 1/3 of a year and 1/54 of her time until she's an adult. And you said, if the calendar year was 6 months, I'd be over 100 or something. And I don't know, it's just a very playful way of looking at almost use this stuff as a guide, but if this is the absolute thing in which we base our experience, I think we're ruling out so much. And
Mm.
there's something, I don't know, there's something to what you said there, though, that I think is really interesting from the point of view of the way in which we're trying to define each other. Like, let's say Irish Italian, lives in Germany, lives in Japan, like expat, or whatever things we wanted to say. Um, these are just such tiny glimpses. Even if you wanted to say the label held true, or it was really told us something really essential about each other,
Mm.
they're only a small fragment of the overall like piece of our existence or our experience. And so and then we overweight them so much with like if they fall into one of these specific categorizations of identity. Like, I
Mm.
think when you start to sit with yourself and observe your own workings, the almost like the 360 degrees of your experience, these things are only just fleeting little like fragments of what we are or what we experience.
Indeed, indeed. How did you see when you're explaining to me just then? Obviously, you've seen this from that perspective, but how did it come about that you realized this? I mean, there's a lot of things that you're saying here that are making a lot of sense, and I just wondered how it came about for you.
What was very interesting for me was when I was 31, I felt I needed external help to make sense of myself because I wasn't feeling very content in relationships. So I went to see a therapist. And I remember
Mm.
at the time, up until that point, even a few months before, I had just moved country. I left a good job in finance and then moved to London. And I was in this in between stage where I was just literally on the ground. I hadn't found work yet. I was there a few weeks. Um, I wasn't going to the gym as regularly, and at the time, I was very like into going to the gym and my appearance that way.
Mm.
So I wasn't doing that as much. I was drinking a little bit. I wasn't feeling very good, um, and just even without. And I didn't have the same network of friends that I just arrived in London, so maybe there was even a bit of loneliness. And I
Mm.
remember being with an ex girlfriend at the time, and I was behaving like erratically. I wasn't behaving very nicely either, I think. And I remember just wondering why they were still with me. And I remember being stunned at that realization of
Mm.
like, how was my own self worth capitulated with just not behaving very well for, not like, maybe being erratic in my behavior for a few weeks, not having a job,
Mm.
not like maybe feeling like I'd put on a few pounds. Like, was my idea of myself so brittle that it couldn't stand, like a hiatus from what I attributed my value to. So that was the jumping off point where I was like, that's weird, because I do think that there's something underneath all this that I do value. Like, I am not in
Mm.
an arrogant way, but that there's some value I feel. And the more then I got into things like meditation and just sitting there and watching things. And it was actually really interesting. I failed in a job that year where I started to do therapy. Like, my ego was getting shattered. Like, that was my modus operandi, if you know what I mean, of just like
Mm.
arrogance and all this. And when I started to pick that apart, I wasn't as confident or assertive in meetings, and I was questioning a lot of things and failing in a role. In whatever way you want to define that. Like, I didn't get fired, but I wasn't asked to stay when I handed in my notice.
Mm.
Um, that was highly liberating.
Mm.
Um, because now, for the first time, because I had got good grades in school, every time I went to a job, I'd got more money. And when I left, I was offered more before I left. And then I had this experience where my identity crumbled somewhat in a year. And then after that, I realized I was still here. And then, that gave me the freedom to go, well, why don't I just explore this further and go to India for 4 months and do
Mm.
some more meditation there, and just seeing how quickly life moves on, that I don't live under this trauma of failure or something. I ended up, meeting my wife, in a German wife, in India, and then someone else offered me something even better in Canada later. Do you know what I mean? Like,
Mm.
and this was a thing that I was hiding from all this time, was just not wanting to fail. And
Mm.
even with some people that I work with at this point, when they say to me, I'm doing everything right, or they say, I rarely ever fail, I find that really I find that a really strange badge of honor to wear, because if we're not even you don't have to categorize it a failure if you're not comfortable with that word or if that's a loaded word, but just things not working out maybe as you hoped, whatever, and it's fine. You still remain after all of that. I think fear of failure and our identity or attachment to not failing is a big hindrance to seeing a lot of things.
Yes. Yeah, through experience, I think, if we're aware enough, like you said, we could take a lot of our experiences in life. There are many ways we could be, how can I say, conditioned to handle certain things. But I think, what's common about us all is that we all know pain. We all know suffering. We still all know what it's like to be happy too. We all know what it's like to chase desires and wants and all that kind of thing. So we as a human race experience the same emotions, so to speak. We may have different upbringings, may have different values, but when it comes down to emotions, I think we all have a common ground. And if one can tap into the fact as to why some of these hardships happen, and maybe like you did yourself, and myself, I've had probably every workplace drama thrown at me in the last, before before 2022. I had everything thrown at me for the last 20 years that you could possibly imagine, including being fired or being yelled at in front of other, I mean, all the nightmare stuff that you read about. I've gone through all of that. And in fact, it's been all of that. If I had taken it as a, and at the time, it's really difficult to handle when you're in those shoes, because getting older and older, you start to realize certain things. But when you're young, you have a lot of ambition and you want to be somebody. You want to do things. It's naturally how we're trained. And at the time that these things happen, you fall into a trap and you think, well, I'm not good enough, or why am I being treated this way? And you just start to go around this self, how can I say, spiral of things that could happen to you. And everything that happens to you is based on habits you've picked up, traditions, all that belief stuff, non-beliefs as well. It just plays with it. And it comes to a stage, there won't be enough time to tell this story, but there's a stage where I got to where I thought, well, I've hit a wall. I don't know what is going on anymore. And what do I do about this? And it got to a stage where I basically couldn't move my own body anymore. I didn't know what was happening to me. But anyway, to cut a long story short, once you've gotten past that, you start to realize that there's something else in operation here that we actually don't see very clearly until we have the humility to look at some of the things that are happening in our life, some of these hardships. Because you can always dismiss hardships. This is what we are very good at. I'm unhappy. I got to go and be happy. What do I do? I don't know. You can go for walks. You can have chocolate. You can have coffee. Whatever you do, drink. Go out with friends. The fact is that you're running away from not being happy, right? You want to be happy. You're angry, so it's not good to be angry. We've been told this. I have to go and manage my anger. So what you're actually doing is creating a distance between what you are and then going off and managing something else. This doesn't make any sense anymore. Right? It
Yeah.
used to be like that. I used to train emotional intelligence, and one of the things about emotional intelligence is how to manage self-management, right? And I don't do that anymore because I think, well, hang on, if you've got self-awareness, which is good, it should be enough if you've asked deep enough questions to know what you are. And then the self-management part never even happens. I don't have any need to manage my emotions anymore. Because they don't bother me. Somebody could call me. I don't even care what people call me anymore. It doesn't really matter. I've been called everything in the book that you can think of. Nothing bothers me anymore. So it's got to the stage where you've realized, like you said earlier, these little pieces don't mean much anymore. And it's like, why bother with it? I don't engage in any of it. But of course, there is a realization to what we were doing. And if there's one way to kind of cut everything out, like I said earlier, where you can kind of start a fresh slate, if I can put it that way. And there is a way to do this, then, you won't have the problem of managing fear. And fear is a very, very deep topic because we don't really know how it works. Um, you won't have the problem of running away from what's actually in your reality at the time. If, for example, if I have cancer or some terminal disease, I may go off and start running around and trying to fix it and make it better, or take it out, or whatever it is that I have to do. Or I may just say, I've got it. What am I going to do now in terms of not stopping to run away from it, but where is the actual problem? And I've had non-terminal cancer before, by the way, and I actually didn't do anything except realize and come to the realization, not by intellect, but just come to the realization that I was, uh, a body with billions of cells, and my mind was totally out of alignment. This is a couple of years ago, before when I hit the wall, and that made me realize that the two cannot be separate. Why am I keeping these things separate? So my whole mindset completely changed after that. And it changed in the sense that I had no option. I found out what my mind was doing and all the tricks it's playing on me. And I still have to corner it sometimes to figure out what it's doing. The key is to realize that, and again, you have to kind of see this in operation through your struggles in life, is that what is operating in my life at this moment that's causing all of this stress? Why do I keep repeating stuff all the time? Why do I have the same feeling all the time? Now, why are there wars going on out there? Because I'm not separate from the mindset of the entire world. And people don't see this. The fact that it may be too challenging to change anything because they think the world is too big, right? There's too many things involved. There's politics and countries and everything else. But actually, you are, in your psychological mind, the representation of how the whole world works. You've got the downloaded enough pieces to know how everything works. So changing, how can I put this? The words are always challenging. Changing the content in your consciousness will actually impact the world. And you only have to look at people who, you don't have to be a Steve Jobs or, even the people who really impacted it. You don't have to be anybody famous. Anybody can impact the consciousness of the world if they realize that they are not separate from what's going on out there. If they realize they are supporting the way the world is structured by who they think they are right now. If that makes any sense. I'm not sure if you're following.
That absolutely makes sense. And but that's even a fascinating, like, I think there's this lovely simplicity in which we're running away from the reality of our complicit experience in what life is or what the world is, by that person over there is the bad guy, and this guy here, no, he's good. Like, he's just doing his best, and he's getting by, and he's getting by in spite of the ills of the world. And I think there's something that can be really liberating about just being able to see, as you say, see the reality of your situation. And it's not in the way that we've been brought up to do it either. It's not in, like, I see bad Mark, oh, you terrible man, like, you have a temper, you've said this, you've done that. No, just looking at it, and just continue to look at it, and hold it. And I think a lot of this may sound ridiculously simple, but I think so much of life is just, can you just watch, and can you pay attention? And I think something wonderful happens, like whether it's returning to our true nature, where I think something is just naturally trying to grow, to express itself. And even, you mentioned the word ambition there. I think it comes from the word ambit, which basically means to fill up a compass, like, which to me sounds lovely. Like, that's just filling up your full range, whatever that is. We'll all have something different for that in our own constellation, or of whatever this smaller self is. But just really curious for you, Gab, when you mentioned that experience of, like, literally feeling like you hit a wall, and your like body not being able to move your body like you used to. Like, what was what allowed you to open up the space in that scenario to start contemplating things that could lead you out of that state of consciousness, shall we say?
That's a good question. It's not easy to answer because, I have been trying meditation and all kinds of meditation, and being through Japan, and I've also trained with pretty well-renowned monks around the world for 20 years. And none of that prevented me from hitting a wall, so to speak. So I was always suspicious of, all those activities and traditions and routines, but I thought I'd try them anyway, because what meditation kind of did help me do was at least create some space, right, between the madness and some focus time. I wouldn't call it anything. I wouldn't even call it meditation. I'll call it focus time, concentration time, which you can do reading a book anyway. But beside the point, that didn't help. And, I probably should explain a little bit more. Having basically gone through what I mean when my body stalled was there was a night in particular where I was in the middle of the night and I basically suffered a number of seizures, shaking, body shaking, holding onto my head. I wouldn't wish this on anybody, but grabbing my head and just feeling shaking. I was in the middle of a hybrid dream state, but I remember being very awake. And I don't know how long it lasted. It just felt like I was constantly being hit in the head with lightning. Right? And it was going straight through the top of my head, in the top chakra. And I thought, I don't know how long this is going to last, but I just took it. I just, okay, whatever, I'm here. I don't know what's going on. Just do what you have to do, kind of thing. And after some time, I fell asleep eventually and stopped. When I woke up in the morning, and I couldn't see a thing. It was just white, complete blank white. I don't know what this was. I basically thought I had died. I really thought I had gone. I thought, this is it. I don't even know if I'm still here, to be honest. I can't prove it. Right? There's nothing in my...
This is a solo podcast, Gab.
I'm sorry. But no, I've got to be careful, again, not to get people to make images of this, because this is just one of my experiences. And, I'm no different from anybody else. But, I just remember that. I'm glad you confirmed that. I think I'm still alive. But anyway, but I remember that space was just so... I have no words. And the closest thing, and I hate using this word, but I call it nothing, because there was really an endless, unnameable something going on in there. And I wasn't there. That's the funny part of it. I didn't even know I existed. And it slowly faded off, I remember. And the first thing I saw was, the window, which somehow was open. And I saw the trees that were outside. It was quite nice. And it was a beautiful experience. But after that, I remember my family was saying, "Are you okay?" all the time for the next 3-4 days, because I was just in a daze. I was like, I don't know what's going on here. And during that time, I just started to see things a lot clearer. I thought, okay, well, this is what's going on. Now I see the structures, and I can tell how we're kind of caught in not knowing what's going on. I mean, we're just still trapped in the mindset we have to think all the time. We have to be busy. And we have absolutely no understanding of what else there is. And here's the key. This is something you said also. It's because we're too afraid to look. We are too afraid of not knowing. And that's the part that if you can get over that fear, and you just have that space, you've got that action which requires no system, no logic. It's just, you just know what to do. Right? It's almost like, I hate to put it simplistically, but your heart is the guide. You intrinsically know what is good for the world and what is not. And that's the in fact, it's not even what it's not. You just know what's good. There's no judgment in that frequency. It's a complete unconditional. There's no expectation. You don't have to set any goals. You don't have to take any action. You can do basically nothing, but nothing will also tell you what you need to do. Because you're so connected to what's going on.
And I think in that space, there's you can never intellectualize yourself out of betraying that feeling.
Yes.
Like, even when you betrayed it and you try to reverse engineer why you did it, you can't get away from it.
Exactly.
I think, in my experience anyway.
Yeah. See if you've known this already. This is probably nothing new for you then. But it's it's something that what we have to watch out for is, we can beautify this space as much as we like, but the problem we humans will do is they say, well, that sounds great, I want that, and then we go after it. We look for a method, right? We want to read
Mm.
books, we want to talk to, I mean, people are going to come ask you now, Mark, how did you get there, or me, or whatever. They're always asking how, but you cannot do it from the space of intellect. That's what I'm trying to let people know, is don't start with uh, going after the unknown. Start with what you do know. What can you see? And if you can look at what you can see with, try looking at it without objecting to it. Just even for a moment, just try and look at it without your opinions. I like this feeling. I don't like this feeling. Don't worry about any of that. Just go with what is happening. And this is the hardest thing to do, because your beliefs start coming in and say, this is not good, I'm uncomfortable. And it's yourself talking to you all the time. But the key is to realize that in the space, you'll find that if you really look at it, you'll see that there is a self-constructed me that's come about either through birth or after birth or before birth. I can't quite put my finger on it. It could come before birth as well, because apparently the baby in mother's stomach is already learning something. But it's until maybe a couple of years old when they actually start to latch on to the fact that they need the dependency more and more, or the parents overemphasize that dependency, or they give them too much direction, which is something that we've been trained to do. But in saying that, it's got to come back to that stage where you are a sponge, just like a 6-month-old baby in many senses, or 1-year-old, where the whole world is just curious. They start to walk, they want to touch things, they want to move. That beauty of curiosity is, I think, what's taught out of us gradually. And it's such a pity, because it's exactly what we need right now to see that open space.
And this is and I'm I'm not trying to simplify conflict, even going back to what you kind of opened up with in this conversation, but I think one of the cores of conflict in anyone's life, even just on the micro level, is just holding on to something so tightly that you don't let any new information or experiences alter that, or you don't want that belief to be threatened in
Mm,
any way. And in what you're like, I think, look, we're naturally an interdependent being. We naturally seek relationship, and we live in relationship to everything. Like we don't exist without everything else existing, almost, on this plane of consciousness or this experience of life.
mm,
But there's something with these, what you just said there about the curiosity piece, that I think sometimes we almost use that word in this playful, like, oh, children ask the question
mm,
why, like, as if it's curiosity is this flimsy kind of superfluous way to view the world.
mm,
But when we think that the world is constantly changing, even the cells in your body constantly changing, everything's moving, even empty space that I see in front of between me and my hand right now,
yeah.
there's things that are happening in this empty, there's always something moving.
Yes.
And I think this is what kind of fucks us up as people, is we want to look at life like it's a static picture. And we want to hold on to our beliefs and our interpretation of that static picture, but
Mm,
really it's always pulsing. And
mm,
that's why this curiosity, I think, it brings us into a state of aliveness or contact with reality. It's the thing that stops you running away from who you are, because you can continuously with fresh eyes kind of go, I thought I kind of knew myself. I thought I had a handle on that, but
mm.
Jesus, I've just said the worst thing I could possibly have said to somebody.
Yeah.
Like, and even the best things too. Like, wow, that was gorgeous. How did I feel so open hearted in that moment? That was an unbelievable experience. What was happening? What changed? What shifted? If you didn't feel that with that person before, like, so I think that's why that curiosity thing, it's used almost in this very flimsy way. It's just kind of thrown around as something cute.
Yeah.
But I think it's fundamental.
Yeah, I think it's always the limitation of words as well, and we create images for those words as well.
Yeah.
So it's also very important to realize, the word is really never the thing. So I think what we're talking about, the
Yeah.
curiosity is the openness. I mean, most of us don't remember what we did before we were, I don't know, 4 years old, around that age. We can't remember what that was like. And that's actually where all the beauty happens, right? In that time when you wake up the next morning. I mean, my kids were the same. When they were 4 or 5 years old, if they did something the day before, they'd completely forgotten about it the day after. They would either do the same trouble again or do the same nice thing again, whatever you want to judge it as. But
Yeah.
there's a beauty in that, and I think it's actually possible to be in that state where there is no judgment, there are no expectations on people, there are no image making of people, and when they are, they get discarded anyway because they're not important. Right? So
You,
yeah.
this is actually, I just want to jump on that because
Mm.
you mentioned that earlier, and I wanted to ask about it, and you've just kind of brought it up again in the like in observing your children. What is this way that you were describing that we could potentially forget the past or not hold on to the past or to start afresh?
Yeah, that's yeah. I think we can continue with what I was saying actually. Now that you mentioned that, because there is what I was saying earlier is there is a. I think it's important to realize how time works, because before we conclude on that path is that time is the way we speak right now. What you and I have been talking about, our day to day conversations with people around us, is a product of the past. Our language is a product of the past. Unless you're teaching me a new word right now, which I think we're okay with. But you're listening right now, so I'm happy. But no, you know what I mean. So the product, it's not just language. Language is something we need to use as a tool, but it's also the product of a complete past in terms of how we speak is also conditioned. How we think is conditioned. How we behave is conditioned. Basically, all our thought, our thinking processes are only based around what it knows, right? So every moment that we live in the now, and this is where I quiz people on what is really the now, we have to be careful we're not using the whole database of the past to live our life in now, because actually we're still living in the past, if that makes sense. Now, your thinking might create something new, but it's still based on the past. You're still using past knowledge to put thinking patterns together, or bits and pieces. The brain is very good, and it will still create something new. Now, I think this is the whole problem. If we misunderstand this, we'll never understand how to change, because we're trying to create new processes, new systems, new solutions, or resolutions based on past knowledge, and nothing in the last 5,000 years has worked. So what are we doing? There's nothing in the space of the known that can possibly ever solve humanity's problems. You have to go into the space of the known and say, well, I don't need to bring in my beliefs in this conversation. Who I am is not important. What I do is not important either. But it's just the beauty of being with somebody and appreciating, so simple, the sound of a human voice. You don't even have to interpret the words. You can just listen. And you don't have to use your hearing to listen. You can use your eyes. And same out in nature. If you look at a tree, or you look at a sunset, everybody's seen a sunset or a sunrise. You don't stand there describing it. You're just lost in the awe of it. And somebody taps you on the shoulder. You're like, they're asking you a question. Give me a minute, right? And you're just lost in that beautiful scenario, and you're not there when that happens. And people who are inspired, they do stuff that they're just so passionate about it. They're also not there if you think about it. They're just going by some kind of incredible action. And these people when they walk in a room, right? They just have this energy about them, and you just feel it. You don't even have to look at who they are. But those actions are there because those people are having, in a way, a certain freedom about what they do. They're not tied into, the structures of our mind, the ones that are restricting us. They're just going out there, in a way, fearless, because they've understood how that works, but they're not intending to do it. It's almost like it's just naturally there. There's an action that takes place that is not in the space of the known. But you have to understand how that time space works. And then what is creating the time? What is creating us is just a complete, I don't know, I sometimes use the metaphor of a bucket. You're all holding up a bucket in front of us, and in the bucket is my history, the people I love, the people I don't like, the experiences, the workplace stuff, and all that kind of thing. And then through that bucket, I have a picture of you, right? And that's who I think you are, and I describe you in that bucket. And I'm actually talking to you. So I should say that again. Am I actually talking to you using the bucket, or am I saying I don't need this, right? I just want to listen and speak to Mark. I don't even need to know your name, actually, but just out of respect, I'll call you Mark. And then the beauty happens, because you're no longer judging what that person says. You're listening. That's what I think active listening is. And that is the activation to understand. If you can see how the past is working, how you are creating a self image of yourself, a me, and that me is always projecting in the collection of the bucket and saying, hey, this is what I want to do. This is my action. This is my want, my dreams, my purpose. And all of that is defined by the known. Then all you're creating is a position where you're not in sync with nature or the universe, or however you want to put it. You're out of sync. You've created a type of violent offset, if I can put that way, because you're not who you are. You're something superficial that you've created, or that's being created unconsciously. That's the thing.
Yeah, this is absolutely gorgeous. There's like, I don't know, the what you captured there, I think is, it almost has me thinking like we're standing on the edge of the like an unfolding, or I'm using words here again that might not capture it, but that there's something that we're both willing to just stand there almost like naked from the labels and everything else. And there's just such, there's an intimacy with life, and there's an intimacy with one another, which brings a certain like sense or experience of aliveness, or just a contact with what is. And I don't know, in that space, and it's not in this really robotic way of trying to get there or trying to do it. I think there's ways we find, because I too, like you, you know, you mentioned for a long time you were practicing meditation, and you know that became something I did. Do you know what I mean? And where I really tried to be conscious for a time,
Mm.
and then I think there's almost a point where you're just trying to, not trying to do something, but you're just, I realize that my life is so much more than a practice, and it's going on all the time. And
Yeah.
that there's something that these moments, maybe conversation for me is a very easy way to fall into that experience for whatever reason. I just, there's something about another human being, particularly a conversation like this, where it's something that just resonates a lot with, from what you're saying. But it can be other things. It can be nature, it can be walks, it can be that sunrise. Like, as you were talking there, you know, there's this painful moment sometimes, as on holidays, and I was looking out at the ocean recently. It can be this painful moment where I almost intellectually try to absorb. I'm looking at this vast ocean, and I'm intellectually trying to impress upon myself that I must take this moment in. Do you know what I mean?
Yes,
Like,
yes, yes.
and you can see, and the difference in experience is like, one is almost this vastness, and then the other is this almost trying to hold on to that moment, and crumpling up the expansion of what I'm looking at. Not saying contraction or expansion is good or bad, but there's just a very different experience in the quality of the contact, I think.
That's such a great example, actually, Mark. That's a really good example of how, we are trained to try and hold on to memories, because and this may have happened with or it may have increased with the technological side of it. Where people are now taking pictures of, well, they've been doing this for many years, but they're taking pictures of everything. And the thing is, there is a beauty in that too, because people want to capture the moment, but they don't realize that it's a moment they don't need time to be captured in.
Yeah.
It's not something they're going to ever forget, if that's the case anyway, because it's just happening now, right? This is the beauty of it. But the moment you go off that, I pull out my cell phone and say, I need to take a picture of this, right? Because I remember this so nicely. You've lost the moment. And it's the same with
Yeah.
everything else we go through. We think the sunset is a beautiful part of life, but there's also a beauty in understanding our emotions and how we do get frustrated. If we stay with the frustration as we would with the sunset, what happens? It, you know, so there's that part of it, and I think that's the part, if we can maybe point people to somehow, if they can see the operation of this third party entity, if I can put it that way, the self, the ego self, how it's really playing with our life and how dangerous it can be, you wouldn't go near it. You wouldn't even bother with it.
I just want to repeat that for anyone listening. I think that's such a gorgeous idea. The staying with our frustration, or looking at our frustration like we would a sunset. Um, and that I think that has profound implications.
Mm.
And there's, I don't know, going back to what you mentioned just about our schooling and good and bad and right and wrong, I think there's so much of the human experience that we've been like taught to disown, run away from, not connect with, and it leads us into these places then of great frustration, or even even more anger, because we're trying to, I don't know, like we're trying to create a jigsaw with half the pieces. And that's a frustrating experience,
Yes, exactly.
and I don't know. There's a wonder in this. It's not to sugarcoat life and say that it becomes incredibly easy, and frustration and anger and pain
Mm.
and suffering suddenly just becomes this glorious experience. But
Yeah.
I think there's so much of what you've been saying, Gab, is just like, if we just create a bit of space, like a bit of space to reflect on things, a bit of
Mm.
space to face things, even if it's, you've had this very obviously strong experience of, like, being in bed holding your head and feeling like seizures, and just, even if you walk through, like, not walk through that, but if you just if you experience that and see there's something on the other side. um I don't know. I think life can give us blessings in ways that we can experience things where we're like, okay, like, this is life happening. I sat there, and it it was an experience.
Right. Right. I think something that you said there made me think. There's nothing on the other side, if I can put it that
Right.
way. There's really
Yeah.
not,
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
because you realize that, and a lot of the work, again, we have to kind of reiterate for listeners as well, is to watch out for the danger of you going after an idea, because there's a difference between fact and an idea or a conclusion that the mind is so well looked for. They're so well looking for all the time. How do I do something? I want the answer to this, and this, and you go after the answer. But all your answers lie in the questions about what's happening now. So never look at the outside or the other side, because it's not there. It's just everything that's happening in your dualistic life right now is something that you don't need to run away from, right? And
Yeah.
the answers are all in there. I mean, you don't have to go outside of that box.
Gab, with so much we've been discussing, whether it's been the opening questions around war, why do we keep repeating the
Mm,
same things, questioning around conditioning, realizations of experiences in nature, of having space, of observing the mind, um, experiences, which left you with a very different perception of life as well. Whether it's both of us reflecting on failure, or perceived sense of failure, and how that was liberating, or how that could open us up to other concepts,
mm.
to perhaps this acknowledging this feeling of life, like that, the intelligence of that can guide us, whether you want to call that your heart, or however anyone else may define that. Just really curious to get your take on the question of what is a good life for you.
A good life for me would be that realization that there is no me. That's as simplest as I could actually put it, and it's a very deep kind of question, but I think that would be the best way to sum it up. To realize that there is no me here. There's no fabricated me that's living life. There needs not to be. But also, once you've felt that in actuality, you'll also feel the entire world. You feel the entire world, the entire energy of the whole world, and you know that there is all this happening, wars and suffering and people, all this kind of stuff. And from that comes a certain compassion, that you feel as a human connected to everybody else in this world, that comes with a sense of responsibility for people's lives, for people's well-being, for people's to understand what life really, really is. That's everything.
Gab, I have absolutely enjoyed the hell out of this conversation. Thank you so much for joining me on the What is a Good Life podcast. I had a suspicion that I was very much going to enjoy this conversation, and that turned out to be. So thank you.
Well, I have to say the same thing. I appreciate you being such a kind, open-hearted listener, to be able to, question within your own mind certain things and to be able to share with me as well. There's a simpleness and beauty in that as well. So I want to thank you too, Mark.